Hello and welcome to another session of Mindful Data Mine. In today's session, we will be discussing about how we can create macro variable using calls input. So without wasting any further time, let's start with the practical. So calls input is a call routine which we can use to create macro variable for any particular column or any particular value available in a data set. Okay, so to start with, let's assume I have a data set. I'm using data underscore null underscore here. What this will do is this would run the entire data set, and in the end it won't store any particular data because we haven't mentioned any data set here. Okay, now here I'll use X, and in X my value for the X is, let's say, test. Okay, now if I want to assign this test or the value of variable X to a macro variable, we can do it using calls input like this. We will write call symput bracket open, and here we first need to write the macro variable name. Let's assume I'll write it as m1. Okay, and then I need to mention X. Okay, now let's run and try to see what happens. So my dataset run is complete. Okay, now if I use %put, then ampersand m1, I should be able to see value for m1 as test. See, we are getting test. There is one more variant of calls input, which is calls input X. Okay, so the difference between calls input and calls input X is, with calls input, in case if we have spaces like this, it would not trim any space, but in case of calls input X, it will trim spaces. Apart from this, we can also mention which particular symbol table we want to put our macro variable in. Is it a global symbol table or a local symbol table? Okay, so these are the two major difference. Now what I'll do is we'll check the difference as well. So here I have modified X as I've added 2 space, then test, then 2 space, and I'll use calls input, and in the second time I'll write calls input X, and here I'll do it as M2. Now what I'll do is first I'll run it. So my data step run is complete. Okay, now I'll again, in a data step, what I'll do, I'll use put statement, and I'll write this line contains data from calls input. Okay, and here I'll use ampersand m1, and to end the line I'll add dot. Similarly, I'll copy the same line, and here I'll write calls input X, and I'll change this to m2. Now I'll simply run it. Okay, let's check the results now. So if you see the first line, this line contained data from calls input, the space is not trimmed, but in case of calls input X, spaces leading and trailing both are trimmed. So this is the first difference between calls input and calls input X. Moving further, we talked about another major difference between calls input and calls input X is that calls input X can store data in global as well as local symbol table. For that, we need to pass the third argument as G or L. Okay, so to better understand that, what I'll do is first I'll use percent underscore put, sorry, percent put and underscore all underscore. So when I run this in the log, I'll be able to see all the macros created, macro variables created along with its value. So when it says global, these are global macro. And if we write client machine, we'll get this number. Okay, similarly, these are my other values. So if you see for M1, I'm getting test. For M2 also, I'm getting test. Okay, now moving back, and these are some automatically created variables. Now what I'll do is first I'll create a macro. Let's assume my macro is percent let. Okay, and here I'll mention this as my mac var, and here I'll mention the value as test underscore var. Okay, when I'll run this, okay, and I'll use put as well. So you will see that we are getting a macro variable my mac var with the value test var in the global symbol table. Okay, now what I'll do is simply I'll create a macro mm1. Okay, amend, and here I'll write mm1. Maybe I'll pass a parameterized macro. Okay, and the value of a is, let's say, 100. And here I create data underscore null underscore. Okay, and then I'll write maybe x equals to, I'll not use x, maybe this time I'll use this same macro variable name. Okay, and I'll write here test underscore var 1. Okay, next is call symput. When I'll use call symput, okay, and mention the same name maybe like this, I'll add run. When I'll first run it, let's see what happens. Okay, then we'll start modifying the code and check the results. I'll add underscore put underscore here so that we are able to see local variables as well. Okay, now let's run this. So if you see, we are getting now mm1 a 100 followed by global macro variables, and my mac var value changes to test var 1. This is because my mac var is already defined in the global symbol table, and therefore the value test underscore var1 has been modified. Okay, in case we do not want to modify it, what we can do is we can simply write percent local my mac var1 sorry, my Mac where, and then if I try to rerun this, okay, now if you see, we'll get mm1a 100, mm1 my Mac where test underscore var 1. We are getting mm1. This signifies that okay, this is inside, this is a local variable which is inside mm1. Okay, and if you see the global symbol table value, this remains test underscore var. Okay, now if you use call Symput x here and you have mentioned percent %local, but still you want to move this particular value to global symbol table, you can simply use G here like this. So this time test underscore var1 will be updated. Okay, so let's run this and check. So here for mm1 we have my underscore mac underscore var, but there is no value associated with it. And if you see my underscore mac underscore var for global, it has been updated to test underscore var1. Okay, so this is the major difference between calls input and calls input x. Kindly let me know in comment section in case if you have any queries or questions related to how we can create a macro variable using calls input, or in case if you feel there is any doubt related to calls input or calls input x. I'll see you in the next session. Thank you.